The morning comes like it always does in Millbrook Estate, grey, heavy with fog, indifferent to what happens beneath the roofs of its historic homes. Police arrive at 7:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in November. The call came from a housemaid, a woman named Catherine who had been cleaning this family's Victorian mansion for 12 years and had never heard anything like the silence she found that morning. The bedroom is immaculate. No signs of struggle. No forced entry. No weapon. Just a man, tall, successful, 43 years old, lying on a bed as if asleep, except his eyes are open and he hasn't breathed in 6 hours. His name was James Ashford. He was the middle of 5 brothers. And by the time the coroner arrived, nobody could explain how he died. The detective assigned to the case, a woman named Sarah Chen, stood in that room for a long time without speaking. She was good at reading spaces, at understanding what wasn't there. And what wasn't there, in that room, was a reason. No poison in his system. No internal bleeding. No signs of asphyxiation. His heart had simply stopped. As if it had been told to. 3 days into the investigation, Detective Chen began asking about the family history. It was a routine question, the kind she always asked. And the answer she received, barely whispered by the family lawyer, made her pause. "Has something like this happened before?" she asked the room. Silence. "In this family, I mean. Has anyone died unexpectedly?" The lawyer's jaw tightened. "You'll need to speak with the eldest." The eldest was named Richard. He was 51, silver-haired, with the kind of face that had weathered something most people never experience. When Detective Chen asked him about family deaths, he didn't answer immediately. He looked at his hands as if they might betray him. 9 generations, he said finally. "That we know of. Maybe longer." Chen's pen froze above her notepad. 9 generations of what? Brothers. Killing brothers. The words fell into the room like stones into still water. And the investigation, which had seemed straightforward, suddenly transformed into something else entirely. She ran the genealogy. She interviewed elderly relatives. She pulled records from a century back. And with each document, with each statement, the same impossible pattern revealed itself. In each generation of the Ashford family, there were multiple deaths between brothers. Sometimes years apart. Sometimes within months. The methods varied, sometimes drowning, sometimes falls, sometimes no apparent cause at all. But the result was always the same. By the 3rd generation in her research, Chen realized she wasn't investigating a murder. She was investigating a curse. The Ashford family history reads like a fever dream written by someone who understood only violence and blood. The first documented case comes from 1847. Thomas Ashford, aged 19, found in the river. His brother Henry claimed he had simply walked away in the night. The autopsy showed water in his lungs, but there were also marks on his wrists, like he had been held beneath the surface by something more than the river itself. Then 1891, another pair of brothers, both dead within a week of each other. The official report called it an outbreak of typhoid. The family knew better. The 1920s, a brother named William was found in the garden, his neck at an impossible angle. The doctor's report was vague. Subsequent family members spoke only of the accident in whispers. 1963, 2 brothers, Michael and Peter, were institutionalized together. They were found in their shared cell with no mark upon either body, yet both were dead. The psychiatric report noted only that they had been exhibiting signs of extreme telepathic distress. And now, in the present day, there was James. Detective Chen sat in an archive room surrounded by documents spanning 175 years. The pattern was undeniable. But the mechanism was incomprehensible. How could the same tragedy repeat itself, generation after generation, with the same impossible quality? She interviewed a psychologist named Dr. Marcus Webb, who had been asked by the family to speak with her. His theory was articulate and deeply unsatisfying. Inherited trauma, he said, manifests in predictable ways. This family has a psychology of violence. It's been passed down through generations, not genetically, but culturally. Through storytelling. Through the knowledge that this is what Ashfords do. So you're saying they kill each other because they expect to kill each other? Chen asked. I'm saying the mind is powerful enough to create that reality, Webb replied. But even he didn't sound convinced. The surviving brothers of the current generation began to speak, carefully and in measured tones, about the things they noticed. The youngest, named Edward, described it like this: "You're sitting in a room with your brother, and you know, not think, know, that he's angry. You can feel it like heat. And you know what he's thinking of doing before he does it." Another brother, named Charles, spoke of moments when he would wake at 3 in the morning gasping for breath, only to receive a call hours later that his oldest brother had experienced a panic attack at the exact same time. "It's like we're connected by something that isn't normal," he said. "Not in a good way. In a way that feels like suffocation." The family's longtime physician, Dr. Eleanor Voss, had been treating the Ashfords for 30 years. When asked about their medical histories, she spoke carefully, aware of confidentiality but compelled by the strangeness of what she had witnessed. "I've documented unusual findings," she said. "Synchronized heart rates, even when the brothers are in separate rooms. Brain activity that seems to mirror each other during moments of stress. And something else, a kind of empathic capacity that goes beyond normal. They can read each other in ways that seem almost supernatural." "Could that explain the deaths?" Chen asked. "Could explain the attraction toward each other that might lead to conflict," Voss replied. "But explain the deaths themselves? No. Not logically." Detective Chen interviewed a neuroscientist named Dr. Harmon, who began to theorize about what might be happening on a biological level. His words were carefully chosen, as if he knew he would sound insane. "The human brain," he began, "has areas dedicated to theory of mind, to understanding what others are thinking. In some people, these areas are more developed. In some cases, we see something that approaches mind reading, though we don't call it that professionally. And in the Ashford family, the areas appear to be hyperactive. Not just in one generation, but in several. It's as if each generation is being selected for this trait, and it's becoming more pronounced." "Selected by what?" Chen asked. Harmon hesitated. "That's the question that keeps me awake." By the time Detective Chen closed the initial investigation into James Ashford's death, ruling it an undetermined natural cause, the remaining brothers were already showing signs of severe psychological distress. They had all continued living in the Millbrook estate, the sprawling Victorian mansion that had housed 5 generations of their family. It was the first mistake. Neighbors reported screaming on 3 separate occasions. Once, police were called for a noise complaint, only to find the brothers sitting in the drawing room in complete silence, though their eyes were wild with something unnameable. One evening in mid-December, the youngest brother, Edward, was found on the kitchen floor with severe lacerations on his arms and face. He claimed he had fallen, but the wounds suggested something else, something deliberate but unfinished. When asked about the injuries, Edward's eyes seemed to look through the interviewing officer rather than at him. "He was trying to warn me," Edward said, "by showing me what he could do. How close we are to losing control." "Who was trying to warn you?" the officer asked. "All of them," Edward whispered. "Even the dead ones. Especially the dead ones." By Christmas, 3 of the 4 surviving brothers had requested transfers to psychiatric facilities. Only Richard, the eldest, remained in the house. He spent his days in the library, reading through family documents with the intensity of someone searching for a cure. He would not leave. And none of his brothers would return. When Detective Chen visited him in the week after Christmas, he was thinner, his hair whiter, his eyes hollowed by something that looked like understanding. "I know what's happening," he told her. "I don't know how to explain it, but I know." "Then tell me," she said. "We're becoming something different. Something that isn't human anymore. And the only way it can complete itself is by eliminating the imperfect versions of itself. One by one." The surviving brother who agreed to a full psychiatric evaluation was Charles, the second oldest. The doctors assigned to his case were thorough and skeptical in equal measure. Charles's account of his relationship with James, the brother who had died, began in childhood and traced a pattern that was almost mathematical in its precision. "We were born 3 minutes apart," Charles said. "Twins who arrived one right after the other. And from the very beginning, there was this sense of being separated from myself. Like James was my missing half. That's not uncommon for twins, his psychiatrist noted. But by our teenage years, it wasn't comforting anymore. It was invasive. I would think something, and James would already know. I would feel something, and he would mirror it back at me intensified. By the time we were adults, being in the same room was like standing in front of a mirror that showed you things you didn't want to see about yourself. And what happened to James? The psychiatrist asked carefully. Charles was silent for a very long time. When he spoke, his voice was steady but empty of emotion. He decided he couldn't exist in a world where I also existed. But he couldn't kill me directly, it wasn't like that. Instead, he made me understand something. He showed me, through our connection, that one of us had to cease. And because he was stronger, because he was more willing to surrender to the darkness of what we are, he simply let himself go. You're saying he killed himself by choice? That he willed his own death? I'm saying he released himself, Charles replied. And I felt it happen. I felt him slipping away, moment by moment, like he was drowning in air. And I couldn't stop it because stopping it would have meant stopping myself. The psychiatric team found no evidence of foul play. The autopsy had been thorough. But neither had it found any explanation for why a healthy heart should simply cease beating. The more they examined Charles, the more they found in him the signs of shared trauma, as if he had not merely witnessed his brother's death, but had experienced it himself, simultaneously, in the confines of his own body. Dr. Harmon, the neuroscientist, requested permission to conduct advanced brain imaging on the surviving Ashford brothers. What he found, when the scans came back, seemed to violate everything he understood about human neurology. The brothers' brains showed a phenomenon he called neural synchronization, areas of activity that appeared almost identical when they were measured simultaneously, even across the distance of the psychiatric facility and Richard's home in Millbrook Estate. It's not telepathy, Harmon was careful to emphasize. We don't have evidence for telepathy. But we do have evidence that their brains are somehow operating in tandem. It's as if their nervous systems are partially merged despite their physical separation. How is that possible? Detective Chen asked. I don't know, Harmon said plainly. The genetic markers suggest an unusual amount of mirror neuron activity, neurons that fire both when an individual acts and when they observe another acting. But in the Ashford family, these neurons appear to have developed in a way that we've never documented before. He pulled up a scan showing the brothers' brains side by side, Charles' from the psychiatric facility, Richard's from his home across the city. Look here, Harmon said, pointing to two small structures deep within the temporal lobe. These should be different, unique to each person. Instead, they're nearly identical. And more than that, they appear to be in communication. Communication how? Chen asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. Through the electromagnetic field of the brain, Harmon said. It's a controversial area, but some research suggests that neural activity generates measurable electromagnetic radiation. In the Ashfords, this radiation appears to be synchronized. They are, in a very real biological sense, thinking together. And that connection, could it explain the deaths? Harmon looked away from the screen. If two minds are truly synchronized, if one person has the ability to feel what another person is feeling with complete fidelity, then acts of violence wouldn't require physical force. It would be possible to cause physiological responses, irregular heartbeat, seizure, respiratory failure, simply through the intensity of shared emotion. You're saying one brother could kill another through sheer psychological communion? I'm saying, Harmon replied slowly, that in the Ashford family, the line between psychology and physiology may have been erased. The geneticist brought in to examine the Ashford family line was a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, and she approached the problem with the cold precision of someone looking at bacteria under a microscope, not at human beings. She spent 3 weeks tracing the family genetics backward through 10 generations, cross-referencing with available DNA samples and historical records. When she presented her findings, she seemed to be speaking about something utterly removed from humanity. What you're looking at, she said, displaying a genetic map on the screen, is natural selection. 9 generations of selection pressure operating on a single family line. Selection for what? Chen asked. Dominance. Specifically, for increased capacity for dominance over closely related individuals. In other words, brothers are selecting against brothers. And in each generation, the one who survives, by whatever mechanism, passes on genes that make him even better at ensuring his own survival against his siblings. That would require evolution, Chen said. And evolution takes millions of years. Usually, yes, Kim agreed. But not in closed populations. Not when the selection pressure is this extreme and this consistent. The Ashford family has been essentially breeding with itself. Marriages are between distant cousins in many cases, and subjecting itself to an incredibly rigid selection criterion. Only the strongest survive. Strongest in what way? That's the question, Kim said. Not physically. We found no genetic markers for increased physical strength or size. But psychologically, neurologically, yes. The surviving members of each generation show increased empathic capacity, increased neural connectivity, increased capacity for understanding and predicting the behavior of others. But then it should be peaceful, Chen said. More empathy should mean more cooperation. You would think so, Kim replied. But empathy in isolation can become something else. Understand, perfectly, what another person wants, what they fear, what they are willing to do, and you understand precisely how to destroy them. The same trait that creates understanding can create destruction. She pulled up a genetic chart going back to the first documented Ashford in 1847. With each generation, certain genetic markers appeared with increasing frequency, markers associated with enhanced mirror neuron development, with heightened dopaminergic response to social dominance, with reduced capacity for neurotypical bonding. What you're looking at, Kim said, is a family that is evolving in real time. And the direction of that evolution is toward a form of human being that is better at detecting and neutralizing threats from others. Better at dominating. And in a closed family environment, those others are your brothers. So you're saying they're becoming a different species? Chen asked. I'm saying, Kim replied carefully, that they are becoming something that hasn't existed before. Whether you call that a different species or a new form of humanity is a question for philosophers. The 4 surviving brothers were placed in separate psychiatric facilities across the state. The intent was clear: prevent them from being in proximity to each other, interrupt whatever biological synchronization was occurring, and allow for treatment. It didn't work. Within a week, all 4 brothers reported experiencing vivid nightmares at the same time, detailed, specific nightmares that seemed to mirror each other perfectly. Edward described drowning, Charles described suffocation, Michael described being crushed under an enormous weight, and Richard described his body simply ceasing to function, organs failing one by one. All 4 experienced these nightmares on the same night. All 4 woke at the same time, 3:47 a.m. The psychiatric staff couldn't explain it. The neurologists couldn't explain it. Dr. Kim suggested that physical separation was irrelevant if the synchronization was at a quantum level, but even she seemed uncertain when she proposed this theory. The brothers were allowed minimal contact, supervised phone calls, letters, never face-to-face. But even these limited interactions seemed to reinforce something rather than interrupt it. He knows what I'm about to say before I say it, Edward reported after a phone call with Charles. It's like we're not really separate people anymore. It's like we're fragments of something larger that was split apart. Richard, in his private journals that were later reviewed by psychiatric staff, wrote extensively about the sensation of being incomplete. He described his brothers not as separate people but as missing parts of himself that he could sense but not fully access. To know that a part of yourself is living in someone else's body, he wrote, to feel their thoughts moving through their mind like you can feel yours moving through your own, it creates a kind of suffering that has no cure. The only relief would be absolute separation, a physical impossibility, or the erasure of one of the selves entirely. He ended that entry with a question: is that what the others have chosen? Have they already begun to leave? By spring, rumors began circulating about unusual heart conditions affecting 3 of the 4 brothers. Irregular rhythms. Palpitations. Tests showed nothing conclusive, but the symptoms were real enough that medication was required. One of the nurses suggested something that seemed almost heretical: perhaps the psychological synchronization was genuine, and the biological effects were real. Perhaps a brother's suffering, felt perfectly and completely through the neural connection, could manifest as physical illness in another. The brothers were each hospitalized. None of them were improving. Detective Sarah Chen closed her official file on the Ashford case 18 months after James Ashford's death. There were no charges filed, no arrests made, no clear explanation ever provided. But the investigation had revealed something far more disturbing than a simple murder. It had revealed the possibility that the Ashford family was undergoing a transformation that had nothing to do with crime and everything to do with evolution. The surviving brothers were no longer cooperating with psychiatric treatment. Edward refused to speak at all, sitting in his hospital bed in profound catatonia. Michael experienced seizures that seemed to have no neurological basis. His brain activity appeared normal during the episodes. Charles spoke only of a compulsion to return to Millbrook Estate, to be in the house with Richard again. And Richard, the eldest, had stopped eating. When asked why, he offered only one explanation: because one of me doesn't need to eat if the other parts are taking in nutrition. We're learning how to be efficient again. How to function as what we really are. The question that nobody wanted to voice aloud began to form in the minds of everyone who had worked on the case. If the Ashford brothers were truly becoming something unified despite their separate bodies, what would happen when they finally managed to be in the same place again? But the question that haunted Detective Chen more than any other came from a different direction entirely. In her final meeting with Dr. Kim, the geneticist had posed something that made Chen understand the true scope of what was unfolding. The brothers aren't the endpoint of this evolution, Kim had said quietly. They're the test case. If this trait is real, if it's genetic, if it's selected for and concentrated, what happens when one of these brothers has a child? Chen had no answer. What if, Kim continued, the child is even more synchronized? What if it's not split across multiple bodies but contained in one? What would that person be capable of? What would they understand? What would they want? And in that moment, the true horror revealed itself. The murders of the past 9 generations, the elimination of brothers one by one, weren't the evolution, they were the preparation. The Ashford family, without ever planning it consciously, had been selecting itself towards something unprecedented. A human being born with the capacity to be completely synchronized with itself. A mind without contradiction. An intention without doubt. The world didn't know it yet. The world was still calling it a psychiatric condition, a rare genetic anomaly, a tragedy. But Detective Chen understood, as she filed away the case for the final time, that the world was looking at the emergence of something genuinely new. And the first one of whatever they were becoming would be born into the Ashford line within 2 generations. As winter came again to Millbrook Estate, and the brothers waited in their separate rooms across the state, all reaching out through a connection that medical science couldn't quite explain or prevent, the question hung in the darkness like an unresolved chord. What happens when evolution chooses a family instead of a species? What happens when 9 generations of pressure creates not a human, but something wearing a human shape? And most disturbing of all, had it already begun? The answer waited in blood not yet spilled, in a future not yet born, in a consciousness not yet awakened. The brothers felt it coming, each in their own separate body, thinking the same thought, feeling the same dread, waiting for what would arrive when their work was finally complete.